Growing up, I always knew I was the second choice. My name is Emma, and from my earliest memories, I watched my parents shower my older brother Michael with endless attention and opportunities while I stood in the shadows. The difference in how they treated us wasn't subtle, it was as clear as day. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, doing homework alone, while Mom and Dad drove Michael to his latest singing competition or club meeting. He was 3 years older than me, and somehow that made him more deserving of everything. Every time his teachers mentioned even the slightest talent, my parents jumped at the chance to nurture it, spending money we didn't really have on lessons and equipment. Michael has such a beautiful voice, Mom would gush to anyone who would listen. He's going to be something special one day. Meanwhile, I learned early on not to ask for much. When I showed interest in art classes, Mom just smiled apologetically. Maybe next semester, honey. Michael's voice lessons are taking up the budget right now. The disparity became even more apparent during Michael's senior year of high school. I was 15 at the time, sitting quietly at dinner when my parents made their big announcement. "We've been saving up," Dad said proudly, "and we're going to send Michael to Preston College. It's one of the most prestigious schools in the state." Michael's eyes lit up. "Really? That's amazing." "And that's not all," Mom added. "You can stay in our apartment near the campus. No rent, of course. We want you to focus on your studies." I pushed my peas around my plate, trying to hide my disappointment. Not that anyone was looking at me anyway. They were all focused on Michael's beaming face as he talked about his future plans. That night, lying in bed, I did the math. If they were spending this much on Michael's education and giving him a free apartment, there was no way they'd have anything left for my college fund. The realization hit me hard, but instead of crying, I started planning. The next day, I visited my grandparents' antique store. My grandfather listened as I explained my situation. "Well, Emma," he said, studying me carefully, "I could just give you the money for college." He paused, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "But I think it would be better if you earned it yourself. How would you like to work here after school?" So that's how it started. While Michael packed up for his prestigious college adventure, I began working at the antique store. Every afternoon after school, I'd help catalog items, assist customers, and learn the business from my grandfather. My grandmother would bring me snacks and tell me stories about the vintage pieces we sold. My parents' reaction to my initiative was telling. When I told them about my job and my plans to save for college, they seemed relieved, almost grateful that I'd solved my own problem. 3 years of working at my grandparents' antique store flew by. Every afternoon spent dusting old furniture and organizing vintage jewelry had paid off. I'd saved enough money for college. When I graduated high school, there wasn't much fanfare, just a quiet dinner at home. But I didn't mind, I was proud of what I'd accomplished on my own. I enrolled in the local state college, choosing a practical business program that wouldn't drain my savings. The tuition was reasonable, and I even had some money left over. Living at home and taking the bus to campus wasn't glamorous, but it made financial sense. "Mom, Dad," I broached the subject one evening, "I've been thinking about getting a used car. It would make getting to classes easier." Dad barely looked up from his phone. "Sorry, Emma. We just don't have the money for that right now." Mom chimed in, "The bus system is perfectly fine. Lots of students use it." I bit my tongue, remembering how they'd helped Michael get his license and even contributed to his first car. But that was ancient history now. My first year of college passed quickly, and just as I was finishing my spring finals, our house erupted with excitement. Michael was graduating from Preston College. Mom and Dad threw him an elaborate celebration, inviting what felt like half the town. Our house was packed with relatives, friends, and neighbors, all there to celebrate my brother's achievement. I was arranging appetizers in the kitchen when Michael made his grand entrance with a pretty blonde woman on his arm. Sarah, his college girlfriend. They were beaming as they walked into the room, hand in hand. "Everyone," Michael announced, commanding immediate attention, "Sarah and I have some exciting news. We're engaged." The room exploded with cheers and congratulations. Mom burst into tears of joy, and Dad clapped Michael on the back so hard I thought he might fall over. But wait, there's more, Sarah added, her voice sweet as honey. After the wedding, we'll be moving to Connecticut. My parents own a successful business there, and they want us to take it over. Mom's tears turned into full-on sobbing. My baby boy, a successful businessman. That's my son, Dad proclaimed proudly. Always knew you were destined for great things. I stood in the corner, watching the scene unfold. Nobody seemed to notice that I'd just finished my freshman year with a 4.0 GPA, or that I'd been working part-time at a local cafe while maintaining my studies. But I was used to it by now. The wedding preparations consumed the next year. While I focused on my studies, now in my third year, Mom and Dad threw themselves into planning the perfect wedding for their perfect son. They took out a substantial loan to cover everything: the venue, the catering, the flowers, the band. Nothing was too good for Michael and Sarah. The wedding itself was exactly what you'd expect: extravagant, emotional, and all about Michael. I stood in my bridesmaid dress, which I had to pay for myself, watching my parents beam with pride as they danced with the happy couple. They'd spared no expense, even though I knew they'd be paying off the loan for years to come. After Michael and Sarah left for Connecticut, I stood in my cramped bedroom at my parents' house, staring at my textbooks. An idea struck me: the apartment where Michael had lived during college was now empty. It was perfectly located near campus, and it would give me some much-needed independence. I approached my parents that evening while they were watching TV. Mom, Dad, since Michael's apartment is empty now, would it be okay if I moved in there? They exchanged glances before Mom spoke. Well, honey, you can move in, but you'll need to pay rent. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Rent? But Michael lived there for free. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his recliner. That was different. We have the wedding loan to pay off now. We need the extra income. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'm your daughter too, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I've never asked you for anything. I worked for my college money. I take the bus everywhere. Mom held up her hand to stop me. She and Dad had one of their silent conversations, the kind they used to have when deciding whether to spend money on another of Michael's activities. Fine, Mom finally said. We'll charge you half the normal rent. I wanted to argue more, but I knew this was the best offer I'd get. Okay, I'll take it. That weekend, I moved into the apartment. It still had traces of Michael everywhere: holes in the walls from his college posters, water rings on the coffee table from his late-night study sessions. I took extra shifts at the cafe to cover the rent, often working until closing time. Between classes, studying, and work, I barely had time to sleep. My final year of college passed in a blur of textbooks, coffee shop aprons, and midnight study sessions. Before I knew it, graduation day arrived. While my classmates' families planned parties and celebrations, my parents opted for a quiet dinner at home. They only invited my grandparents, no extended family, no friends, no elaborate catering like Michael's graduation. We sat around the dining room table, eating the lasagna I'd made myself. Grandma reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Emma, dear, we're so proud of you, she said warmly. Graduating with highest honors while working part-time, that's quite an achievement. Before I could respond, Mom's phone buzzed. Her face lit up as she read the message. Oh, speaking of achievements, she interrupted, Michael just texted. The business is doing wonderfully. He says they're expanding into 2 new locations. I watched as my graduation dinner turned into a celebration of Michael's success in Connecticut. My grandparents exchanged knowing looks, and Grandpa squeezed my shoulder supportively. My hard work in college paid off sooner than I expected. Within 2 weeks of graduation, I landed a position at Anderson & Mitchell, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. The starting salary was better than I dared hope for, and I was thrilled to finally be starting my career. That excitement lasted exactly 3 days, until my parents found out about my salary. Emma, Mom said during one of her unexpected visits to the apartment, now that you're making good money, you should start paying the full rent amount. I stared at her, wondering if I'd heard correctly. But we agreed on half. That was when you were a student, she replied matter-of-factly. You can afford it now. I wanted to point out that Michael had lived here for free even after getting a job, but I'd learned that comparing myself to my brother was pointless. The apartment's location was perfect, just a 10-minute walk from my office, so I reluctantly agreed. Life fell into a routine. I threw myself into my work, determined to prove my worth at the company. Every month, like clockwork, Mom would call. Emma, dear, just reminding you about the rent. It's due on Friday. We're counting on that money. 3 years passed this way. I earned a significant promotion and raise, but I kept that information to myself. I'd learned my lesson, any hint of financial success would just lead to more demands from my parents. Through their occasional updates, I heard that Michael and Sarah had a baby boy. I'd seen pictures on social media, but hadn't visited. Our communication had dwindled to perfunctory birthday messages and holiday greetings. I was fine with that. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Emma? Mom's voice was tight with tension. We need to talk about your brother. There's been some trouble. The business, well, it's gone bankrupt. He had a terrible fight with Sarah's parents, they're furious about how he managed things. They're not speaking anymore. I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was heading. He's coming back home, she continued. With Sarah and the baby. Oh, I said carefully. I assume he'll be staying with you and Dad? Actually, Mom paused. That apartment you're in is quite large. He'll be staying there. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. What? Mom, this is my home. I've been living here for years. Don't be dramatic, Emma. Your brother needs help. He doesn't have any money right now, so he'll stay there for free. You can keep paying the rent. That's absurd, I protested. If he's moving in, maybe I should just find my own place. Don't you dare, Mom's voice turned sharp. We need your rent money now more than ever. Michael's going through a rough time, you wouldn't want to make things harder for him, would you? I shook my head in disbelief and hung up without another word. The moving day was worse than I'd imagined. Michael, Sarah, and their crying baby Tommy showed up with a mountain of luggage and baby equipment. Mom arrived to supervise the transition, which apparently meant making my life as uncomfortable as possible. Emma, clear out your room, Mom directed, hands on her hips. Michael and Sarah need it for Tommy's nursery. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, my personal space for the past 4 years. What? Where am I supposed to sleep? The living room has a perfectly good couch, she replied, already starting to move my things. You can't be serious. I pay rent here, full rent, and you're putting me on the couch. Mom's expression hardened. Don't be selfish, Emma. Your brother has a baby. Babies need proper rooms. So I watched helplessly as my bedroom was transformed into a nursery, complete with a crib, changing table, and all the other baby paraphernalia. My belongings were unceremoniously piled in a corner of the living room, which was now my bedroom. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Michael moped around the apartment all day, alternating between complaining about his in-laws and reminiscing about his glory days as a successful businessman. Sarah spent her time either crying or arguing with Michael about whose turn it was to change Tommy's diaper. The baby seemed to sense the tension and cried constantly. I'd come home from a long day at work to find dishes piled in the sink, toys scattered everywhere, and dirty laundry spilling out of the hamper. The first few times, I tried ignoring the mess, but the dirty dishes attracted ants, and the clutter made it impossible to relax in what was now my bedroom. So I cleaned, I cooked, I did laundry. And every meal I prepared mysteriously disappeared before I could eat it. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day at work, I decided to extend an olive branch. Michael, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral, we actually have some openings at my company. I could put in a good word for you with HR. The benefits are great, and the starting salary is decent. Michael looked up from his phone, his face twisting with indignation. An entry-level position? Are you kidding me? I'm a businessman, Emma, I don't do entry-level. I need an executive position, something worthy of my experience. Your experience running a business into the ground? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Michael's face turned red. You don't know anything about what happened. That was my in-laws' fault. They set me up to fail. He stormed off to his room, my old room, leaving me standing there, wondering how much longer I could live like this. 3 months into our forced cohabitation, I sat at my kitchen table, now covered in Tommy's dried baby food and Sarah's coffee rings, reviewing my bank statements. The numbers didn't lie, my expenses had nearly doubled since Michael and his family moved in. That was the final push I needed to call my parents. I rehearsed what I would say, determined to remain calm and rational. The phone conversation went about as well as expected. Mom, Dad, we need to talk about the living situation, I began. Michael and Sarah aren't contributing anything to the household expenses. They're eating all my food, using utilities I pay for, and… Emma, Mom cut me off, her voice sharp. I can't believe how selfish you're being. Your brother lost everything. His in-laws betrayed him. He has a baby to take care of. Dad's voice joined in from the background. You should be grateful you're in a position to help family. But that's just it, I pressed on. I'm not just helping, I'm carrying the entire financial burden. They don't buy groceries, they don't. Enough, Mom snapped. Your brother is going through a difficult time. This isn't forever. You need to be more understanding. That night, I opened my laptop and started searching for apartments. I bookmarked several promising options, all within walking distance of my office. Just in case, I told myself. Just in case things get worse. Things got worse exactly 2 weeks later. I was sitting on my couch bed, trying to focus on work documents while Tommy wailed in the background and Michael and Sarah had their fourth argument of the day. The doorbell rang, and my parents walked in without waiting for anyone to answer. Mom had that look on her face, the one she used to get right before announcing Michael had been enrolled in another expensive program. Dad stood behind her, avoiding eye contact. Emma, we need to discuss the rent, Mom announced. I looked up from my laptop. I paid this month's rent on time, as always. Yes, but starting next month, we're doubling it. The room fell silent, even Tommy stopped crying. I stared at my mother, certain I had misheard. Double? But I'm already paying the full market rate. Mom gestured around the apartment. Well, now there are more people living here. More wear and tear on the property. More utilities being used. It's only fair that the rent reflects that. Fair? I couldn't help but laugh. How is it fair that I should pay double rent for being forced to sleep on a couch in my own living room? If anyone should pay more, it should be Michael. He's the one who… I'm not paying anything, Michael jumped up from his chair. This is ridiculous. I lost everything, and now you want me to pay rent? Of course not, sweetie, Mom soothed, before turning back to me with a harder expression. Emma, you have a good job. You can afford this. Your brother needs time to get back on his feet. I looked at each of their faces, Mom's stern expectation, Dad's awkward avoidance, Michael's entitled indignation, Sarah's smug satisfaction. 3 months of built-up frustration threatened to explode, but I swallowed it down. Instead, I simply nodded. Fine, I said quietly. Double rent, starting next month. Mom's face broke into a satisfied smile. She and Dad left shortly after, clearly pleased with how smoothly their announcement had gone. They had no idea they'd just given me the push I needed to finally make my decision. Later that evening, while trying to read a book on my uncomfortable couch bed, I overheard Michael and Sarah talking in the kitchen. They were trying to whisper, but their excitement made them careless. Can you believe it? Sarah giggled. Your mom just told me they're going to give us half of Emma's rent money every month. Michael's smug reply made my blood boil. Of course they are. They understand we need help right now. Emma makes plenty of money, she can support us for a while. This is perfect, Sarah continued. We get to live here for free, and we'll even have spending money. Your sister doesn't need to know. I lay there, gripping my book so hard my knuckles turned white. All this time, I'd thought my parents were just being unfair, but this was a calculated scheme. They weren't just enabling Michael, they were actively planning to use me to fund his laziness. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the apartment listings I'd bookmarked. One caught my eye, a modern one-bedroom in a quiet building, actually closer to my office than the current apartment. The rent was exactly what I'd been paying before the proposed increase. I called the number immediately, trying to keep my voice down. Hi, I'm interested in the apartment on Cedar Street. Yes, I could come see it right now if that's possible. Perfect, I'll be there in 15 minutes. The apartment was everything I hoped for, clean, quiet, and Michael-free. I signed the lease on the spot and paid the security deposit with my emergency savings. Back at the apartment, I waited until everyone was asleep before quietly packing my essential belongings into 2 large suitcases. I left my furniture, it wasn't worth the hassle, and I could buy new pieces that didn't have memories of this mess attached to them. The next morning, I wheeled my suitcases to the door while Michael sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings he had no intention of applying to. Going somewhere? He asked, barely looking up. Month-long business trip, I lied smoothly. Big project in our Cincinnati office. He just grunted, already uninterested. I moved into my new apartment that evening, ordering takeout and sitting on the floor of my empty living room. The silence was beautiful. No crying baby, no arguing couple, no guilt-tripping parents. Just peace. For the next month, I lived quietly in my new home. I bought a comfortable bed, a cozy couch that wasn't a bed, and kitchen supplies that only I would use. I cooked meals that stayed in my refrigerator until I ate them. I slept through the night without being awakened by Tommy's crying. Then, right on schedule, my phone rang with my mother's number. Emma, she snapped without preamble, why haven't you sent the full rent payment? We agreed on double, remember? I couldn't help but laugh. Actually, Mom, I know all about your little arrangement with Michael and Sarah. Were you planning to tell me that half my rent money was going straight into their pockets? That's none of your business. Your brother needs. No, Mom, I interrupted, still chuckling. What my brother needs is to grow up and take responsibility for once in his life. I've moved out, found my own place. The apartment is all yours and Michael's now. You what? She screeched. You can't do this. We need that rent money. Well, I'm sure Michael will step up and start paying rent now that he's had time to get back on his feet. I can't wait to see how that works out for you. There was a moment of silence on the phone after my declaration. I could almost hear the gears turning in my mother's head as reality finally sank in. Their reliable source of income was gone, and all they had left was their unemployed son who had never paid a bill in his life. Emma, sweetie, Mom's voice suddenly turned sugary sweet, a tone I recognized from childhood when she wanted something. Let's not be hasty. We can work something out. What if we go back to the original rent amount? That was fair, wasn't it? I settled deeper into my new couch, the one I'd picked out myself, in my own apartment, where no one could kick me out of my bedroom. No, Mom, that's not going to happen. But Emma, we're family. You can't just. Family? I interrupted. Is that what you call it when you scheme behind my back to funnel my money to Michael? When you kick me out of my own bedroom while I'm paying all the bills? When you've spent my entire life treating me like an ATM while treating Michael like royalty? That's not fair, we've always. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up the phone and blocked their numbers. That was 6 months ago. My grandparents keep me updated on the situation, though I never ask, they just know I need to hear it, need to know I made the right choice. According to them, Michael, Sarah, and Tommy are still living in the apartment. They haven't paid a single month's rent. Mom and Dad are covering all the utilities, plus giving them spending money because the baby needs things. My brother still hasn't found a job. Apparently, there just aren't enough executive positions available for failed businessmen with a track record of bankruptcy. My new life is peaceful. I got another promotion at work, bought myself a car, and started taking evening classes for my MBA. My apartment is always clean, my food stays in my fridge until I want to eat it, and I sleep in my own bed every night. The other day, I ran into Sarah's cousin at the grocery store. She told me they're expecting another baby. I just smiled and wished them well, knowing that somewhere across town, my parents are probably already figuring out how to pay for another nursery. But that's not my problem anymore. For the first time in my life, I'm putting myself first. And it feels absolutely right.
My brother is dead, and here you are thinking about such things. I can't believe it. I can't stay with you anymore. My husband Jaden shouted at me during the funeral, but I knew he was just hiding his true intentions. His body carried the scent of a perfume, the same one his late brother's wife always wore. I want a divorce. Divorce me immediately. Okay, let's get a divorce then. For a moment, my husband was stunned. He couldn't believe I accepted so easily, but then he started to grin, as if he thought he could now be happy with his late brother's wife, free from me. But it won't be that easy. I whispered those words so quietly that no one could hear. My name is Stella. I live with my husband Jaden and my mother-in-law. My parents have already passed away, and I have no siblings. My mother-in-law welcomed me warmly as if I were her own daughter. I was overjoyed to finally have a family after spending so much time alone and depressed, with no one to lean on. I loved and deeply appreciated her. Jaden had a younger brother, Bobby, who was married to a young woman. They lived near my in-laws. When I joined the family, Bobby welcomed me with the same kindness as my mother-in-law. We lived close to each other, and our families often traveled together. I was happy with my new life, but those happy days were coming to an end. One day, Bobby was rushed to the emergency room. I left work immediately and hurried to the hospital. In the hospital room, I found my mother-in-law crying. I sat by her side and asked about his condition. He seemed to have passed the critical stage, but the doctor said it was still too early to tell. I held my mother-in-law's shoulder, comforting her as best I could. Still, there was no sign of my husband or Bobby's wife. I wished they would arrive soon because my mother-in-law needed them too. Jaden was on an urgent business trip but was on his way to the hospital now. My mother-in-law was distressed, unable to reach Bobby's wife, Karen. I wondered if there was any way to contact her, but there was nothing we could do but wait. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly. Finally, we heard footsteps approaching the hospital room. It was my husband, and with him was Karen. He explained that he had brought her to the hospital. I was relieved that they were finally there. But then, I felt something off. My husband, he smelled different. Was he wearing perfume? The scent was familiar. I looked over and saw Karen holding my brother-in-law's hand. A few days later, Bobby passed away. The wake and the funeral went by without incident, and things settled down somewhat. I noticed that Jaden was taking care of Karen with unusual attentiveness. Of course, she must be in more pain than anyone, having lost her husband, and surely she needed emotional support. But they seemed closer than necessary, even enjoying each other's company. I began to doubt their relationship, feeling guilty for my suspicions. Maybe I was just looking at things the wrong way. After all, it was better for Karen to be happy than to be depressed. So I tried to push those thoughts aside. But perhaps I should have paid more attention. Not long after, Jaden dropped a shocking revelation on me. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice serious. I was folding laundry at the time. I stopped and turned to face him, sensing the weight of what he was about to say. Ever since my brother passed away, there's been something missing in me, he confessed. It's a wound that won't heal, not even when I'm with you. I was shocked, to be honest. I thought I was taking care of my husband in my own way, trying to offer him the same support that my mother-in-law had given me. But it clearly wasn't enough. It hadn't been long since my brother-in-law passed away, and I was trying hard not to show how upset I was. I nodded along, listening to the rest of what Jaden had to say. But I've met someone who fills that emptiness, he continued. My heart sank as I braced myself for his next words. It's Karen, Bobby's wife. She's grieving too, and we found comfort in each other. There are some voids that only those who've lost someone can fill. His words were like a dagger to my heart. I tried to deny what I was hearing, to push away the rising panic. The love of my life is Karen, he confessed. We just met in the wrong order. Please divorce me. My head spun. What the hell was he talking about? My mind raced back to the hospital, to the moment they had shown up together, both smelling of the same perfume. Karen is my destiny, he insisted. I know that now. I felt a wave of disbelief and betrayal wash over me. You've been planning this for a long time, haven't you? The words slipped out before I could stop them. What do you mean? He snapped. Are you accusing me of having an affair? I was taken aback by the coldness in his voice, but I couldn't stop myself from explaining what had been gnawing at me, the perfume, the way he took care of her, how close they had become. The more I talked, the more I laid out the evidence of his infidelity. Jaden's mood darkened, his anger flaring. We're still grieving, and you're talking about this? I can't believe it. I can't be with you anymore. With those words, he walked away. As I watched his back disappear, the full weight of what he had said crashed down on me. He had just told me that I was not his life partner, and the shock and pain hit me all at once. All I could do was cry. The pain was unbearable, and I felt like I had to do something, anything to keep myself from falling apart. I reached for Bobby's belongings. He had loved photography and kept a meticulously organized album of his photos. I opened it, flipping through pictures of us on trips together. The happiness captured in those photos felt like a distant memory, and I feared I had destroyed any chance of reclaiming it. As I turned the pages, something slipped out from between them, an envelope. A few days later, Jaden and I finalized our divorce. When my mother-in-law learned about Jaden's intentions and the divorce, she broke down in tears and apologized to me. I'm so sorry for my foolish son, she said, her voice choked with emotion. I know you'll find happiness, Stella. Even though we're no longer in the same family, you and I will always be family. If you ever need anything, please call me immediately. She had always been good to me, and she had nothing to apologize for. It broke my heart to see such a kind woman cry, and leaving her behind was the hardest part of all. After I moved out of my parents-in-law's house and started living alone, I was overwhelmed by a sense of loneliness. It wasn't the first time I'd lived alone. I had done so before marriage, but this time, the solitude felt almost unbearable. However, that loneliness didn't last long. 2 months later, I received a call from my mother-in-law. She told me that my ex-husband and Karen had moved out, leaving her alone in a house that now felt too big and empty. She was thinking about selling the house and starting a new life on her own. But moving away would mean leaving behind the neighborhood and the friends she could rely on. Her voice was tinged with sadness when she asked if it would be all right for her to move closer to me. Hearing the loneliness in her voice, I suggested something I expected. We should move in together. At first she was hesitant, not wanting to impose. But I couldn't bear the thought of her being alone, and eventually I convinced her. In the end, we built an apartment and moved in together. Since then, we've grown closer, more like mother and daughter than ever before. Our days together were peaceful and life seemed to be moving forward. But then, one day, I received a call from an unknown number. To my surprise, it was Karen. What do you want after all these years? I asked, bracing myself. How come the house is gone? And what's this about you being adopted? She shouted, her voice sharp and accusing. I felt my heart skip a beat at her sudden outburst. The house my mother-in-law sold had been replaced by a new building, which was to be expected. As for the adoption, it was something my mother-in-law had suggested when we decided to move in together. She wanted us to be a real family, and I had agreed. But Karen's tone made it clear that she was upset, perhaps even resentful. I began to suspect that she had been after Bobby's inheritance all along. The inheritance that my mother-in-law had now passed on to me. The thought that Karen might have married my ex-husband for Bobby's money crossed my mind more than once. Realizing the time had come to address this, I spoke firmly. You have no right to tell me what to do. We're not family anymore, and you should be grateful I didn't ask for alimony for the affair, but if you push me, I will. Karen seemed taken aback, but quickly recovered, her voice laced with venom. You accused Jaden of adultery even before we were together. You made him want to leave you. You should be ashamed of yourself." I scoffed, her response so predictable that I couldn't help but counter it with a touch of sarcasm. "What if I told you I have proof?" Silence fell on the other end of the line. I had found the letter, the one that had slipped out of Bobby's photo album the day my husband left me. The letter was filled with Bobby's bitterness and pain. "The doctor told me I don't have much time," the letter began. "By the time you read this, I won't be around anymore. This letter contains hidden evidence of my wife's affair with Jaden. If Jaden or Karen finds this letter, they can destroy it all, and I will have failed miserably. But if you, Stella, find this letter, let my wife and my brother be punished for what they deserve." The silence on the phone was deafening. I knew Karen had no comeback for this. My brother-in-law's letter also revealed his deep feelings about his wife, Karen. He wrote about how, after we got married, Karen quit her job and seemed to think it was his responsibility to make her happy. She just sat around the house, doing nothing. When he suggested they should help each other out more, she got upset. There were days when she shut him out completely, especially when she felt he wasn't earning enough money. He confessed that it was hard for him to accept how much he had changed. He tried to work harder, hoping that if he made her life easier, she might return to the person he once loved. But in the end, he realized that the woman she had become was her true self all along. He felt ashamed that he hadn't seen it sooner. If Jaden and Karen hadn't gotten involved, he wrote, I wouldn't have tried to make things worse. But I can't let her misdeeds go any further. I have to take action for my late brother-in-law. I'll destroy them both. Bobby had seen through Karen a long time ago and had gathered all the evidence. Now it was up to me to carry out his wish. I could almost hear Karen shaking on the other end of the line, trying to sound strong, but her voice trembled. There's no way you can ask for alimony now that we're married, she spat. That's a bluff. You're just trying to scare me, but it's not going to work. I'll sue you for blackmail. Be my guest, I replied calmly. But remember, paying for a lawyer costs a lot. You might think it's a waste of money, but I'm prepared. You seem to have studied the division of property, but you overlooked adultery. So naive. You thought Bobby didn't know anything, didn't you? Karen hung up violently. Later, I filed a claim for alimony against my ex-husband and his new wife through a lawyer. After a while, my ex-husband reached out to my mother. Apparently, he wanted to leave Karen and live with her again. Karen's true nature, combined with her anger over the alimony charges, had made her unbearable to live with. My ex-husband's voice on the phone was so tired, it was hard to believe they were newlyweds. Like my late brother-in-law, he had failed to see Karen's true nature. It's amazing what blood can do to you, my mother remarked as she sat next to me, listening to the phone conversation. Come on, Mom, I didn't know she was like that, my ex-husband pleaded. I can't live with her anymore. I just want to be with you and Stella again. What the hell? My mother snapped. You're the one who said she was the one and left Stella. I won't allow a man who hurt my daughter to live with us. If you're really sorry, you'll first pay the alimony. If you do anything to me or Stella, I'll call the police. No, Mom, please, he begged, his voice pathetic. Despite his pleas, my mother couldn't forgive him. But she did offer him a final act of mercy. If you really can't pay the alimony, she said, I'll pay it for you. But in exchange, you must forego all inheritance after my death and never appear in front of us again. He had no choice but to accept. We never heard from him or Karen again. My mother and I continued to live together, finding joy in each other's company. We celebrated our happy moments, comforted each other in our sadness, and even strengthened our bond by working through our disagreements. Bobby, I thought to myself, I've avenged you. Although Bobby and I are no longer connected by blood, the bond I share with my mother is stronger than ever. We'll continue to live happily together as a family. My husband Taylor is a real piece of work. Despite borrowing $50,000 from my dad, he's not only avoiding repayment but also considering filing for bankruptcy to dodge it. If I declare bankruptcy, I don't have to pay it back, right? Serves him right, he says, as smug as can be. He really has no idea what life would be like after bankruptcy. I'm Michelle, 32 years old. Taylor and I have been married for 5 years, and for better or worse, we've led an average life together. We don't have kids, but we have a dog instead. We mostly spend our time with each other and our furry friend. Seeing our families is rare since they live far away, so we usually visit them during summer or Christmas vacations. Taylor always makes a fuss when it's time to go to my parents' home. Hey Taylor, you're coming with me to my parents' house for the holidays, right? Oh no, if we're going anywhere, let's go to my parents' place. We've been to your parents many times. It's time we go to mine. We've talked about this. It's just a hassle. And there's nothing to do at your parents' house. Don't you think you should apologize to my dad about the money? Our life is possible because of him. He even helped us with that debt crisis. Again with that? You're so annoying. Taylor sighed loudly and left the room. When we first got married, my dad gave us the down payment for our house and later lent Taylor part of the capital for his startup business. I've been slowly repaying the money for the house, but the $50,000 Taylor borrowed for his business remains unpaid. I know Taylor's business is struggling and times are tough, but that's a different issue altogether. Taylor's lack of gratitude towards my dad irks me every day. Then one day, something happened. I got a rare phone call from my mom, who usually only texts. Hello, Mom. Is now a good time? Yeah, I'm fine. You usually text. What's up? Actually, your dad, Daniel, collapsed. Dad collapsed? You're joking. He wasn't feeling well for a few days. He's stable for now, but if you can, could you come home? I get it. I'll talk to Taylor and head back home as soon as possible. When I explained the situation to Taylor, he reluctantly agreed to the trip just this once. But there's another issue I have to think about, Rocky. I called our regular vet to board him, but they're fully booked, I said. So what's the plan? I'm thinking of hiring a pet sitter. At my words, Taylor let out an exasperated sigh. What? A pet sitter? Give me a break. I can't stand the idea of a stranger in our home. We don't have a choice. Rocky needs his walks, his bathroom breaks, his meals. Absolutely not. They'll be fine for a day. Stop relying on services like that. Are you kidding me? If we leave him alone for a day, he'll get stressed out. We couldn't find common ground, and the conversation was going nowhere. Then Taylor seemed to have an idea and exclaimed, Ah, I've got it. I've thought of something great. What is it? Why not ask Isabella? Why would Isabella be involved? She just got divorced, right? And she's been complaining about not having work. Let's ask her to take care of Rocky. While we were gone, we decided to ask Isabella to look after Rocky as a part-time job. Honestly, I was completely against it. The last time Isabella visited, money disappeared from my wallet. I had withdrawn $300 that morning, and by the time Isabella left, it was gone. When I told Taylor, he dismissed it, saying it must be a misunderstanding. Since I had no concrete evidence, I couldn't do much, but I was certain it was Isabella. I didn't trust her and didn't want her in our home. However, with the trip back home imminent and Taylor firmly against hiring a pet sitter, we were out of options. We ended up asking Isabella. I gathered my always ready stash of $3,000 and gift cards, hiding them in a drawer. I slipped a piece of paper into the drawer to know if anyone opened it, and of course, I didn't tell Taylor. Otherwise, I couldn't feel at ease letting Isabella into our home. We asked Isabella to take care of our dog and headed to my parents' house. Thankfully, Dad's condition stabilized and we could talk to him. When we returned, I told Taylor about the drawer trick. As expected, the paper had fallen and $2,000 along with gift cards were missing from the $3,000. I had told Isabella not to enter the bedroom, but I had suspected she might steal something. I sighed and told Taylor, See, now do you get why I didn't want Isabella in our home? Well, she's having money troubles too, so a little bit off. Cut it out. We're not exactly rolling in it either, Taylor. You owe money to Dad, remember? That's a different issue. Just call Isabella over here now. Taylor reluctantly dialed her number. When Isabella arrived and we confronted her about the money, she admitted to everything, including the previous time with my wallet. She promised to pay it back, and we let her go. But my anger hadn't subsided. Taylor then sat down next to me. I'll make sure Isabella doesn't come around anymore. But what you did was jaw-dropping, Michelle. You're surprisingly mean-spirited. Setting up a trap like that for Isabella isn't something a grown adult should do. Wait a minute. Are you taking your own sister's side even after all this? Isabella's in the wrong too, but what really turned me off was how you doubt your own family and set up such an elaborate scheme. Don't joke around. If you believe me about her stealing money last time, maybe we could have prevented this. Just like you don't want the pet sitter in our house, I don't want Isabella in our house. Well, You're so narrow-minded. Don't you have anything else to say before blaming me? It felt like he was saying it was my fault for setting up a trap to catch Isabella, who had stolen twice. I was angry and frustrated. After that, Taylor's and my relationship started to deteriorate, with more and more days of not speaking. The tipping point came when Taylor handed me a piece of paper after returning from work. "What's this?" "You know what it is. Divorce papers. You want a divorce. I've had enough of you over this Isabella thing. I don't want to be with you anymore. There's no point in being married. Let's divorce. This happened because of your sister, you know. Don't shift the blame onto me. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. Just sign it." No discussion, just Taylor pushing his own viewpoint. I grew disgusted with him and agreed to the divorce. It was clear Taylor would keep taking Isabella's side in the future, so I figured it was best to cut ties with him sooner rather than later. A few days later, the divorce went through. We sold the house we'd lived in for 5 years and barely divided our assets. I told Taylor to use that money to keep making monthly payments on his debt to Dad, and he agreed. And so our married life came to an end. Months later, Dad passed away from illness, and just like that, I inherited the right to collect Taylor's debt repayments. But the following month, Taylor fell behind. I did a little digging through mutual friends and found out his business was failing. He had mentioned he was struggling with the company just before we divorced. Knowing Taylor was in trouble, I decided to give him a break and wait 1 more month. However, when there was still no transfer from Taylor, I lost patience and called him. "Hello, it's Michelle." "What's up, Michelle? What do you need?" "What do you mean? What do I need?" "It's about repaying Dad. You haven't paid since last month." "Oh, is that all? Well, I'm not paying anymore." "Excuse me." Caught off guard by his unexpected response, my thoughts froze for a moment. Taylor, without any remorse, continued. "Why should I? My father-in-law's dead, right? No point in paying back a dead man." "What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. I inherited Dad's right to collect the debt, so now I'm the creditor. Understand? I don't care. I said I'm not paying. I can't pay." Suddenly furious, Taylor started yelling over the phone. "I'm struggling with my business too, you know. Why should I repay a debt to a dead person? It's a waste of money. Don't joke around. How can you even say that? Your current business exists because of Dad." "Yeah, sure, he helped back then. But he's dead now. Only you would benefit if I repaid the debt. So why would I do that?" At that moment, rage surged through my veins. Our parting wasn't amicable, and I knew about his current economic situation. If only he would sincerely apologize for the delayed repayment, but he was showing no remorse, let alone an apology. Worse still, he seemed to think he was off the hook for repayment now that Dad was gone. I was infuriated by Taylor's convenient thinking. I wouldn't let this go. He would repay every penny. "Just to clarify, Dad's death doesn't absolve you from repayment," I said in a stern voice. "Annoying," Taylor muttered irritably. "I told you, only you benefit from me paying back. There's no way I'm paying back $50,000. All right, then I'll take appropriate measures. Is that okay?" Suddenly, Taylor erupted in laughter over the phone. "Then I'll just file for bankruptcy." "Bankruptcy? Yeah, if I file for bankruptcy, I won't have to pay back anything. Serves you right. You think that will save you? You better repay. You're just trying to get money out of me. I can't possibly pay back that amount." "So you never intended to repay it?" "If the business had gone well, sure, I would have paid. But it didn't. Not even sorry towards Dad." "Why should I apologize to a dead person? Both you and your sister are irresponsible with money." "Disappointing. Say what you want. I've got my trump card. Bankruptcy. Fine, go ahead and file for bankruptcy, but you'll regret it. Thanks for the advice. Bye." With that, he happily hung up the phone. Taylor seemed to think that filing for bankruptcy would free him from his debt, but he failed to consider the downsides that come with it. If declaring bankruptcy wiped out all your debts, everyone drowning in debt would be doing it happily. I had a friend who had to declare bankruptcy because they co-signed a loan once. It was a heart-wrenching process, and I saw the struggle up close. So I knew how tough bankruptcy could be, and I decided not to tell Taylor about it. Later, it seemed Taylor really did go through with the bankruptcy process. I got a text saying, "Debts are gone. Serves them right." I didn't reply. I just waited to see how things would play out, pretty much expecting Taylor to self-destruct. A few weeks later, just as I expected, a desperate call came in from Taylor. "Michelle, please help me. Long time no see. What's up?" "I'm screwed. Yeah, I got rid of my debts, but now I can't even live a normal life." "Oh, that's unfortunate." "Unfortunate? You don't get it. I'm really in trouble here." Well, declaring bankruptcy is a last resort only for those with no other options. Taylor, who clearly didn't understand the situation, needed it spelled out plainly. "Listen, bankruptcy is the last resort. They'll take all your assets, cars, electronics, everything. Your credit cards won't work and you'll be blacklisted." "How do you know all this?" "I saw a friend go through it. It was a nightmare." "What? So you knew this would happen and you didn't stop me?" "Are you finally getting it? This is no joke. I thought I could just reset my debts and get back to normal life. This isn't what I envisioned." "Not my problem." "It is your fault. If you told me how hard bankruptcy is from the start." At this point, Taylor was trying to shift the blame, so I gave him a reality check. "Don't you get it? You made the choice without doing any research, even after I warned you. You made your bed, now lie in it. And you're asking for help now? That's pretty cheeky. I'm your ex-husband in need. Isn't that enough?" "Ex-husband? You didn't even show up to Dad's funeral, and you've never been grateful for anything. Why would I help trash like you? Karma's a bitch, isn't it?" "Trash? Who are you calling trash?" "Just to make it clear, you're in a really bad spot right now. Don't expect to live like you used to. Bankruptcy doesn't offer a bright future. You chose this path. Now live with it for the rest of your miserable life. You damn fool." I let out all my pent-up frustration and hung up the phone. I immediately blocked his number and blocked him on social media. That's how I finally cut off all ties with Taylor. As for him, word has it that he's living a pretty miserable life. He thought he could just wipe the slate clean with bankruptcy and start fresh. He may have acted like he had it all together, but reality isn't that kind. Since he's on the blacklist, he obviously can't get a loan for anything. On top of that, it seems he owed a lot of money to his friends and hasn't paid them back. He's been contacting other friends to borrow money, but no one will lend him anything now that they know his situation. In fact, almost all of his friends have cut ties with him, and it seems he's living a lonely life now. It's nothing less than poetic justice. As for Isabella, it turns out she wasn't just stealing from me but also from her friends. Apparently, she was recently arrested by the police. The rumors spread in the neighborhood, and she lost her job too. I'm so relieved to see those two people I can't stand both get their comeuppance. I'm really glad I got a divorce when I did. I'll never have to deal with those siblings again. If I ever date someone in the future, I won't make the same mistakes. I'm determined to be more discerning in judging people and building better relationships. Laid up with a high fever, so weak I couldn't move, I asked my eldest son to bring me a glass of water. I thought he would at least do this much for me. But instead, he brought a glass full of beer and splashed it on me as I lay bedridden. From the direction of the door, I heard laughter. There she was, my son's wife, clapping and laughing. My eldest son joined in, holding the empty cup. I couldn't believe it. Despite my feverish and dazed state, that scene burned clearly into my memory. Clean the house by the time we get back, huh? I had tolerated Mark and his wife's selfishness up to now, but this was too much. Yes, I will clean it, I said, enduring the pain in my throat so they could hear me. My name is Helen. I'm a 73-year-old housewife. My husband George, 75, is now retired and teaches calligraphy to children at a nearby community center. He had always dreamed of opening a calligraphy class after retirement, and it made me happy to see him realize his dream and head to the center with a smile every day. We have 2 sons. Our younger son is married with 2 elementary school-age children. However, our 44-year-old eldest son, Mark, was unmarried and living with us. He works part-time at a convenience store at night, but only about 4 days a week. He doesn't contribute any money to the household and leads a lazy life. Despite several warnings from both my husband and me, Mark didn't listen. He wasn't gambling or in debt, so eventually, we stopped warning him. One day, out of the blue, Mark announced he got married and brought his wife home without even greeting us. She barged in as if it was the most natural thing in the world. From that day on, I had to prepare meals for her as well. I didn't mind cooking for her, but she didn't help at all. Nor did she clean up after meals or even say thank you. She even demanded a cup of coffee after dinner. My husband, unable to watch any longer, harshly warned them, and they stopped making unreasonable demands in his presence. However, when he wasn't around, she would start again, asking me to take her dress to the cleaners and other such requests. When I warned her, Mark would take her side, saying, "It's just something you can do on your way to shopping. Don't be so stingy." Despite feeding both Mark and his wife for free, they never contributed a penny to the household. Their demands seemed unreasonable, but I hesitated to talk to my husband about it, not wanting to cause a parent-child quarrel. So I decided to wait and see a little longer. Today, as per my daughter-in-law's request, I took her clothes to the cleaners. My husband and I usually visit our younger son's family in Canada about twice a year. We were planning to visit again during the upcoming week-long federal holiday. Since we visit frequently and they also occasionally come to see us, our grandchildren have become very fond of us. We had already bought toys as gifts and were planning to buy a roll cake as a souvenir. When visiting our son's family, we often take the sleeper train rather than the plane, enjoying the scenery along the journey. Now that we have more leisure time, the train ride soothes us better. The day before our visit, feeling unusually excited, I went shopping after seeing my husband off to his regular calligraphy class. On my way back, I stopped by a cake shop where they sold handmade cookies. Figuring the cookies would last longer than the cake, I bought some for the grandchildren. As I made my way home, it began to drizzle. Hurrying home, the rain gradually became heavier. I decided to stop by a nearby convenience store to buy an umbrella. But by the time I arrived, my clothes were soaked. I considered waiting out the rain at the store, but not knowing when it would stop and wanting to warm up my chilled body in a hot bath, I bought an umbrella and hurried home. When I got home and was about to take a bath, my eldest son's wife came in and said, "Helen, are you about to take a bath? I have to go out now. Let me use the bath first. Helen, please start preparing dinner early," and she closed the bathroom door behind her, even though it wasn't her house. I changed clothes and started preparing dinner, trying to ignore her. While cooking, I started sneezing. It would be bad if I caught a cold right before our departure tomorrow. But my eldest son's wife, who had been in the bath for a long time, did not come out for over an hour. The next morning, the day we were supposed to visit our second son's family, I woke up feeling sluggish. My throat hurt and my nose was running. When I checked my temperature, it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Realizing that I had indeed caught a cold from yesterday's rain, I told George to go alone this time because I didn't want to pass my cold on to the grandchildren. George suggested canceling the visit, but we already had the sleeper train tickets. We also had the toys we bought as gifts for the grandchildren. So I insisted George visit our second son's family, even if it was just him. I gave him the cookies I bought at the cake shop the day before. Despite George's concern, I reassured him that it was just a slight fever and a minor cold, and that I would be okay after taking some medicine and resting at home. George usually doesn't talk much to our eldest son and his wife, but that day he told them I was feeling under the weather and made them promise to take care of the housework. After seeing George off with a smile, I was about to go back to bed when I heard my eldest son and his wife talking. "Oh, such a hassle. It's just a cold, right? But now that Dad's gone, we can be free for a while." I couldn't believe this was coming from the people who were living in our house without contributing to the expenses. But it was typical for them. You do realize the only reason you're able to live here is thanks to your father, right? When I pointed this out, Mark and his wife took offense, retorting, "We're doing you a favor by living with you in your old age." That's right. Normally, everyone hates living with their in-laws, my daughter-in-law added. It's ironic, as they're the ones who moved in with us without being asked. Yet they act as though they're doing us a huge favor. Despite feeling sluggish and wanting to rest, I ignored the remarks and returned to my room. That evening, my daughter-in-law came into my room and woke me up. "Mother-in-law, you're not planning on skipping cooking just because you're feeling a little sick, are you? You know I can't cook, right? Telling your mother-in-law to cook because you can't isn't something a 35-year-old woman should say." I was feeling sick and wanted them to figure out their meals themselves. Even my husband should have warned them before leaving in the morning. I tried to ignore them and go back to sleep, but my daughter-in-law wouldn't leave the room. I thought it would be better to eat something light and take medicine, so I forced myself to get up and head to the kitchen to prepare some food. As I was preparing the meal, Mark came home. Despite seeing me in the kitchen wearing a mask, he didn't utter a word, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Not only that, but he also demanded, "Hey, the bath isn't ready yet." It didn't matter to Mark and his wife whether I was sick or not. Knowing they wouldn't listen anyway and wanting to rest as soon as possible, I finished preparing the meal and went to prepare the bath. When I returned to the living room, Mark and his wife were having a lively conversation while eating. "We're going on a trip abroad the day after tomorrow, so please don't spread your cold to us." Surprised by their sudden mention of a trip abroad, I ate a light meal in the dining room, away from the warm living room, as my daughter-in-law suggested. In the living room, the couple was excited about their upcoming trip abroad. Mark was taking time off his part-time job, and they were going on a 3-week trip to Europe. I hadn't heard anything about them going on a trip abroad, but I was grateful they wouldn't be home starting the day after tomorrow. On the morning of the day Mark and his wife were about to leave for their trip, my cold had worsened to the point where I couldn't get out of bed. When I measured my temperature with the thermometer, I had nearly a 103-degree Fahrenheit fever. I was thirsty, but my headache was so severe that I couldn't even lift my head. In this state, Mark came to me. "Hey, cook us some food. You can still cook even if you have a cold." Tears welled up in my eyes at the sight of my son telling his sick mother to cook. "Eat out," I managed to say. At my words, Mark frowned but said nothing and started to leave the room. Before he left, I asked him to bring me a glass of water. I thought he would at least do that much for me, so I waited. But what Mark brought me was a glass full of beer, and he splashed that beer all over me as I lay bedridden with a high fever. From the direction of the door, a loud laughter echoed. When I turned to look, it was my eldest son's wife, clapping her hands in amusement. In front of me, my son Mark was also laughing, holding the empty cup. It was unbelievable. Although I was feverish and dazed, that sight burned clearly into my memory. "Make sure you clean the house before we get back, haha." I had tolerated Mark and his wife's selfishness up to now, but I couldn't stand it any longer. "Yes, I'll keep it clean," I mustered the strength to say loud enough for them to hear despite the pain in my throat. After that, Mark and his wife cheerfully left the house. I didn't even have the energy to wipe the beer-soaked mess from my face, and I fell asleep as I was. When I woke up, I felt somewhat refreshed, though my head was groggy. I remembered being splashed with beer by Mark, but surprisingly, I didn't feel sticky at all. The covers on my bed were also changed. Just as I was questioning what had happened, my husband George came in with a basin. Seeing me sitting up, he placed his hand on my forehead and asked, "Are you okay?" "Why is George here? Wasn't he supposed to be with our second son's family?" I tried to ask but couldn't voice it out. Noticing my confusion, George began to explain. He had taken a sleeper train to visit our second son's family, but he was worried about me and decided to return early. He didn't trust Mark and his wife to take care of me. Our second son's family also suggested he hurry back, so he flew home. When he arrived, he found me lying exhausted in bed with a strange smell of beer lingering around. He quickly cleaned my face with a damp towel, tidied up the area, and cared for me while I slept for a full day. When George asked me what had happened, I tried to explain, but my voice failed me. The memory of being splashed with beer by Mark brought tears to my eyes. Seeing this, George brought me some water and said, "Sorry, I shouldn't have asked you now. Just rest for now." He then went to prepare me some porridge. It turned out he had prepared the porridge so it would be ready whenever I woke up. The kindness of George brought tears to my eyes again. Thanks to George's care, I regained my energy in about 2 days. When I told George what had happened while he was gone, his face turned stern. "I can't stand it anymore." "Yes, me too." 3 weeks passed since Mark and his wife left for their overseas trip. While I was enjoying peaceful days with George, my phone rang. It was a call from Mark. "Here it comes," I said, pressing the answer button. "What the hell? Why is our house gone?" "Well, didn't you say to clean the house?" After I recovered from the cold, I told George everything about Mark and his wife's actions. How they forced a sick me to take care of things, how they threw beer on me while I was bedridden with a high fever, and how they went on an overseas trip themselves. After hearing my story, George muttered, "I can't stand it anymore." Until now, I had always been the one to calm George down. But after this incident, I didn't feel like pacifying him anymore because I myself couldn't forgive them. Actually, George and I had been secretly planning to build a new house without telling our eldest son and his wife. The house isn't finished yet, but we moved into a monthly rental apartment and sold our house in order to stun them with the news. We have been told that someone wanted to buy our land to build a shop, so the sale happened quickly. Originally, we had planned to keep the old house for our eldest son and his wife. But after the way they treated us, there was no need to consider them anymore. The place has already been turned into an empty lot, so they must have been shocked to find the house gone. The new house will be completed in about 2 weeks. A carpenter we know has allowed us to store our belongings and furniture there in advance as we've explained the situation to him. We disposed of all of our eldest son's and his wife's belongings. When we told them this, our eldest son shouted, "Are you kidding me? I'll report you to the police." His wife was also yelling in the background. At that moment, George took over the phone and I switched it to speaker mode. He said to our eldest son in a low voice, "Go ahead, tell the police. I'll tell them too. You guys threw beer at your sick mother, then went on a vacation abroad, and even forced her to do housework while she was sick. Who do you think is the bigger sinner, you guys or us for disposing of your things?" My husband's face as he spoke to our eldest son was like a villain's. "This has nothing to do with that. Selling the house. Where are we supposed to live? Where are you guys even staying?" Our son yelled back. George replied, "That house was originally ours. It's our right to sell it. Plus, you're no longer our son. Don't contact us anymore." And then he hung up. 2 weeks later, we got a call saying that our new house was completed, so George and I headed over. The call was from the carpenter, a friend of George's. He's about 60 years old and the site supervisor. He showed us around the house, explaining the layout. We designed it as a single-story accessible house, keeping our future retirement life in mind. It's an even more beautiful house than we imagined, and we couldn't wait to start living there. The furniture we had left in the living room had been moved by the carpenters. When I thanked them, they said, "No problem. George really helped us out back in the day, so this is nothing." And so the two of us, George and I, started living in our new house. The house was even more comfortable than we had imagined, and our life was peaceful without our eldest son and his wife around. However, about a month after we moved into the new house, our devilish eldest son and his wife showed up. Neither George nor I had told them our address, and our younger son Mark and his wife shouldn't have told them either because we explained the situation. They'd probably hired a detective or something to find us. "Hey, it's not fair for you to sell the house, dispose of our stuff, and then move to such a nice place by yourselves. As your eldest son, I have the right to live here, don't I?" Our son said, glaring at us with large bags in his hands. We had intended to cut off ties with them, but we were stunned to see our eldest son and his wife, who were clearly intent on moving in. Just then, voices came from the back of the house. "What are you guys here for? To what end? After taking our living place, how dare you ask such a thing? From today, we're living here too," our son said. As they were about to step in, the front door opened. "Huh, Mark? What are you doing here? Here to cause trouble again? Come on, you're old enough to stand on your own 2 feet, Stephen said with a look of disbelief on his face. Beside him were his wife and their 2 grandchildren. They were visiting because the new house had just been finished. After relaxing at home for a while, Stephen's family had gone to a nearby convenience store. "Who is that? Are they bad people?" 5th grader Sophia asked innocently. My husband, who had just been about to drive Mark and his wife away, suddenly had an idea. "While Stephen's family is staying for a week, you two should also stay here. I won't allow you to squat here indefinitely, though." With that, he welcomed everyone at the entrance into the house. The living room gathered, and the first to lounge on the sofa were Mark and his wife. "Man, I'm beat. Mother-in-law, can I have some coffee?" "I'll take mine black," Mark said casually. Stephen's wife was taken aback by the casually made request of Mark and his wife. At this, the grandchildren rushed to Mark and his wife. "Why can't you two do that yourselves when you're adults? Even I, a kid, can pour my own juice." The innocent comments of the grandchildren made Mark's wife uncomfortable, and she went to pour her own coffee. However, the grandchildren's why attacks continued. "Why can't you cook even though you're an adult woman? My mom can cook anything. Why don't you clean up after yourself? Both my dad and I always clean up the plates when we're done eating. Why can't you do that? My sister and I always do it ourselves. The grandchildren, perhaps due to the good upbringing by Stephen's wife, were responsible and often helped her. Stephen also didn't just leave everything to his wife, they worked together. Therefore, it was probably perplexing for the grandchildren that Mark and his wife didn't do anything themselves. At first, Mark and his wife had retorted, but the Y attacks didn't stop, and by the end of the week, they were both exhausted. Mark's wife in particular seemed to dislike being called auntie. "Don't call me auntie," she told her grandchildren in earnest. But when they replied, "Why not? You're an auntie, aren't you? You're not young enough to be called sister," she was shocked. Even I and Stephen, who were listening nearby, couldn't help but laugh. After Stephen and his wife left, we sent Mark and his wife away. They were worn out by the children's incessant Y attacks, so we were able to drive them away without much resistance. However, a few months later, we received a message asking, "Can you lend us some money?" Up until now, they had been staying in our home, eating our food without paying a cent in rent or living expenses. Since Mark, our oldest son, was making enough money from his convenience store job to cover all expenses, it wasn't a problem at all. Now that they had been kicked out of the house, Mark and his wife were supposed to start paying for their own rent and living expenses. Yet, they kept spending money as they used to, seemingly living off borrowed money without any savings to speak of. Their only income was Mark's salary from working at a convenience store 4 days a week. Mark's wife seemed to have no intention of working. Considering their situation, it was audacious to say the least for them to ask, "Can you lend us some money?" "We will never lend you money in the future, nor will we help you," we told them, and then blocked Mark's number. A few days later, while my husband and I were out, we received a call on my husband's phone from our home security company. There was an intruder in our house, and they sent us the video footage. It turned out that Mark and his wife were trying to sneak into our house through a window. It was pitiful that they were resorting to breaking into their parents' house to steal money because they were broke. At least they hadn't caused trouble for others. But that's not saying much. Mark and his wife were quickly apprehended by the security and were taken away by the police, who were called to the scene. They were released because they were family, but not before being harshly scolded. Since then, Mark and his wife stopped forcing their way into our house or trying to break in. We have both blocked their calls, so we never receive phone calls from them. According to Stephen, our second son, he also received a request for money from Mark. Apparently, Mark had borrowed money from loan sharks and was now on the run because he couldn't pay it back. "You reap what you sow. Pay back the money you borrowed yourself," Stephen said, and blocked Mark's number as well. We don't know what happened to Mark and his wife after that, but we chose to forget about the people who left us as they poured beer over a sick person with no involvement with Mark and his wife. My husband and I are enjoying our peaceful everyday lives. My husband used to teach calligraphy classes at the nearby community center, but now he teaches at home in a room we designed for that purpose. When Stephen and his family come to visit, the grandchildren and other children take calligraphy classes together, and they seem to be having a good time making friends. I am grateful for these peaceful days and am making the most of each day.